I pressed my hand against the cool glass of the balcony, the city lights blurring beneath my gaze. From here, I could hear faint strains of laughter and champagne corks popping from across the street, the sound of my parents fully immersed in my sister's gala. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt in years, a sudden sharp pang that made me gasp. My heart stopped for a second, not from fear, but from the disbelief that this was happening again. I smoothed the silk of my blouse, the soft fabric brushing against my wrist, grounding me. My phone vibrated sharply on the marble countertop, a reminder of the outside world, of obligations and expectations. I ignored it for now, letting the buzzing fade into the background, like their laughter. I'd spent so long keeping my life hidden, making sure my parents never knew the truth about how far I'd come. They saw the polite, composed daughter they wanted to see, the one who smiled through family dinners, who nodded politely at their judgments, who let my sister take the spotlight. But behind these polished smiles, I'd carved out a life that was entirely my own. And yet, seeing them celebrating her tonight, with the same blind pride they'd never shown me, I felt that old, familiar ache, the sting of being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. My fingers traced the edge of the balcony, trembling slightly, and I realized that no matter how much I'd accomplished, some wounds never quite heal. At least, not until you face them head-on. I was 18, sitting cross-legged on the faded carpet of our family living room, clutching a small, leather-bound journal my grandmother had given me. "Write your truth," she had said softly, her voice trembling with age but steady with wisdom. I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time, but I held on to it like a lifeline. That evening had been a storm. My parents were hosting one of their typical family discussions, which usually meant lectures disguised as concern. My sister, younger by 2 years, sat smugly beside them, absorbing their praise with that practiced, effortless charm that had always infuriated me. I had dared to mention a scholarship I had won, a full ride to a university across the country. "You're being dramatic," my mother said, waving her hand dismissively. "Don't make such a fuss about a little award. Your sister has plenty of achievements too, you know." I felt my hands shake, the journal sliding slightly on the floor beneath me. My chest tightened as a lump rose in my throat. I wanted to scream, to make them see me, see my potential, but the words caught somewhere between fear and exhaustion. Instead, I swallowed hard and stood, brushing tears from my cheeks. Before I left the room, I opened the journal. My grandmother's note inside glimmered in my mind. "Sometimes, the world won't notice your worth. That doesn't mean it isn't there. Protect it, nurture it, and one day, they'll have to see." That night, I packed my favorite notebook, a few changes of clothes, and the small silver locket my grandmother had pressed into my hand. I left the house with the quiet certainty that I couldn't rely on their validation. I had to build a life on my own terms, even if it meant stepping into the unknown alone. The first few months after leaving home felt like walking through fog. I had a small apartment downtown, its paint peeling at the corners and its faucet dripping incessantly, but it was mine. Every evening, I would open my grandmother's journal, reread her words, and remind myself that my worth wasn't tied to anyone else's approval. I landed a part-time job at a boutique marketing firm where the owner, a sharp-eyed woman named Clara, took notice of me immediately. "You have a way of seeing things others don't," she said one afternoon, sliding a folder across the polished wooden desk. "If you work with me, you could be more than just a junior assistant. You could actually shape campaigns." I stared at her, heart hammering, the thought of someone seeing my potential both terrifying and exhilarating. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I learned to craft pitches, analyze client data, and speak confidently in meetings where my voice had once trembled. There were nights I lay awake on my thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, second-guessing myself, wondering if I had bitten off more than I could chew. I remember the nights my hands shook as I dialed cold leads, sweat dampening my palms, and yet, I persisted. Slowly, my efforts began to pay off. My first big client came unexpectedly, a small tech startup that trusted me to manage their entire campaign. When I saw the final report showing a 40% increase in their engagement, I felt a surge of pride I hadn't known I was capable of. And then another client, and another. Through it all, I kept my parents in the dark. Birthday cards with vague updates, holiday calls with polite smiles. It was all a carefully constructed facade. I didn't need their approval, and they certainly didn't deserve to witness the late nights, the sacrifices, the relentless pursuit of something they had never believed I could achieve. By the time my sister's gala came around, I had a thriving business, a modest yet elegant apartment filled with the art and furniture I loved, and a network of mentors and friends who genuinely celebrated my success. And still, I stayed in the shadows, savoring the quiet power of a life built entirely on my terms. The night of the gala arrived, and I didn't initially plan to go. My parents had sent one of those obligatory invites, the kind that assumed I would swoop in, praise my sister, and quietly retreat. But something inside me had shifted. I realized I didn't have to hide anymore. Not entirely. Not when the time was right. I arrived in a sleek black dress, the kind that whispered elegance without screaming for attention. My heels clicked against the marble floor of the ballroom as I entered, and all eyes instinctively turned. My parents, perched near the center with champagne flutes in hand, froze mid-laugh. My sister's smile faltered for just a second. "Sarah," my mother's voice trembled, almost disbelief, as she adjusted her pearls. I walked slowly, deliberately, letting them take in the life I had built. The subtle designer watch on my wrist, the tasteful diamond studs in my ears, the poise that radiated confidence without arrogance. I didn't rush to explain. I let the silence stretch, watching their expressions twist from curiosity to shock. Finally, I spoke. "You've seen my sister's achievements tonight," I said, voice calm but firm. "I thought it was time you saw mine." I revealed the truth. The thriving marketing firm I had built from scratch, my ownership of multiple high-profile campaigns, the accolades and awards that lined my office walls back home, and yes, my net worth, quietly accumulated but substantial enough to surprise them. The room went still. My parents' faces flushed a mix of shame, disbelief, and awe. My sister, who had always been the golden child, looked at me with wide eyes, her practiced composure cracking for the first time. "I've worked nights when no one noticed, fought when no one believed, and learned when no one guided me," I continued, letting the words sink in. "And yet, I didn't need validation. I just needed to believe in myself." I saw my father's jaw tighten, my mother's hands clutch her champagne glass, and my sister take a small, hesitant step back. For the first time, I held the room's energy, not as the overlooked sibling, but as the woman they had underestimated for far too long. The tension in the room was thick, like velvet draped over everything. For the first time, I had the upper hand, not through anger, not through confrontation, but simply by existing in the life I had forged. My parents and sister had assumed I would quietly admire their celebration, nod politely, maybe even disappear back into the shadows. But tonight, that shadow belonged to them. I took a slow breath, letting my gaze sweep over them. "I'm not here to punish anyone," I said, my voice steady, "but I need things to be different if we're going to move forward. If you want to be part of my life on my terms, certain changes have to happen." I started with my parents. "Mom, Dad, respect isn't given automatically, it's earned. I need you to see me as an equal, not a comparison to my sister. Your pride should not come at the cost of my confidence or happiness. If you can't do that, I won't engage." I watched their eyes widen, realizing that this wasn't a speech. They were conditions for real behavior, not empty words. Then I turned to my sister. "I want us to have a real relationship, one that isn't built on rivalry or envy. You'll need to acknowledge my accomplishments, just as I acknowledge yours. And you must let go of the need to compete with me at every turn. I care about you, but I will not shrink so you can shine." Every word was measured, balancing compassion with firmness. I wasn't asking for perfection. I was asking for growth, for accountability, for a chance to have family ties without the weight of old patterns. When I finished, the room was silent except for the soft hum of the gala beyond the doors. I felt a quiet power settle over me, a realization that I could care, but not at the expense of myself. For the first time, I wasn't just the successful one they never saw. I was the architect of my own life and the gatekeeper of how they fit into it. In the weeks that followed, subtle changes began to take root. My parents reached out, not with guilt, not with empty apologies, but with questions about my work, my dreams, and my life. They listened, really listened, in a way I hadn't seen before. My sister tentatively admitted that she'd been intimidated, that she had felt overshadowed by my independence. And for the first time, our conversations were honest, untainted by comparison or judgment. I found myself smiling more freely, a lightness in my chest that hadn't been there for years. My grandmother's silver locket, which I had worn that night at the gala, rested against my heart like a talisman. Her advice, protect it, nurture it, and one day they'll have to see, had been my compass through every late night, every challenge, every moment of self-doubt. Sitting in my apartment one quiet evening, the city lights twinkling through my window, I realized how far I had come. The pain, the rejection, the sleepless nights, they had all shaped me into a woman who could stand tall, not just in success, but in self-respect. I had built a life that reflected my values, my ambitions, and my strength. And as I traced the edge of my locket, I whispered to myself, softly, but with unwavering certainty, I am enough, and I am unstoppable. It wasn't a declaration to anyone else. It was a promise to myself. A promise that no gala, no comparison, and no past rejection could ever dim the power of the woman I had become.